Chapter 15. I could rest my whole case about St. Luke's distinctive character on this chapter alone, probably the most influential in his gospel on the mind of Christendom. But I would not want to gain that advantage by cutting this passage off from what precedes, or suggesting any break in the writer's train of thought. The exclusiveness of the Pharisee and of the Jewish nation embodied in him has run through all we have lately read, shown as the anti-Christian principle that must keep the Jew from believing in the king and shepherd who had come. St. Luke, I think, presents this sin in that character where Matthew makes us feel it as an outrage on the law and the prophets, the culmination of every evil they denounced. Most have seen in the parable of the prodigal son a hint of the Gentile order, along with an implicit rebuke of the Jew unwilling to see his brother welcomed back with music and dancing. But this has been the reading of commentators more than of ordinary readers, who rightly resist any interpretation that would strip the parable of its direct, personal claim on each one who recognizes himself as the prodigal. The heart certainty that this parable expresses God's inmost mind cannot be set aside for any interpretation, however reasonable or consistent with the evangelist's purpose. But if we look to this discourse for a revelation of God's purpose, we will find that its various readings, which taken alone become either dry and scholastic or narrow and partial, are held together by a higher light. First, we should take the story's details as they stand. This is not a tale of distant figures. Actual publicans and sinners were with our Lord, actual Pharisees were murmuring, "This man receiveth sinners and eateth with them." It is surely of these that he speaks when the shepherd leaves the 99 to seek the one lost sheep, and the woman sweeps her house for the lost coin. We badly misread Luke and worse misread Paul if we suppose their chief concern is with Gentiles as such. They were born Jews, Jewish in every sympathy, but they had discovered that to be truly Jews they must first be men. It is a gospel to men, a covenant with men that they proclaim and therefore one with the Gentiles with all nations. This may seem obvious enough to state with such emphasis, but I do not think we, commentators, the Christian world, myself, my reader, have kept hold of it or realize the confusion and loss that forgetting it has caused. Once we are rid of that forgetfulness, Luke's Gospel and Paul's epistles come to us as new books, new though the same old ones, read even more literally and simply than we read them as children. Holding this thought, we can come to the story of the two sons without fear of losing its personal force even as it opens to the widest view of God's purposes for the world. If the prodigal is called a son from the first, and the hard elder brother in the field is told all that I have is thine, we must ask ourselves plainly whether these are not the basic facts and laws of the new dispensation, whether the gospel is not the claim that men as men are sons of God, that they must be prodigals joining themselves to a foreign country and feeding swine until they discover this, and that once they discover it, the condition of truly enjoying and benefiting from it is that they acknowledge this same right in all, even the most outcast, and rejoice at their childlike return to claim it. This view of God's purposes is a comfort to the reader of Gentile as well as Jewish history, and it speaks even more pointedly to the modern world, to Christendom's right to claim sonship to God for all its children, and the impossibility of giving baptism a merely narrow, formal meaning if it does not proclaim that very truth to each of us. At the same time, it carries the strongest encouragement to spread the good news of that sonship far and wide, and a warning against the great guilt of turning baptism into a plea for exclusiveness, denying the very human privilege it asserts. Alongside this general meaning, the parable also holds the history of each man who comes to himself, showing that his return to sanity is nothing but discovering an actual father, which itself implies acknowledging an influence drawing him, a confession that the father has sought the lost sheep and swept for the lost coin. Here the lines of Matthew and Luke, starting from different points, meet. One shows Christ revealing a father, the other Christ bestowing a spirit, but the spirit guides the lost child to the father, and the moment his heart is touched, he knows the source.